So, with the end of Season 3 of Invincible, we've had the unfortunate retirement of the biggest fraud in the franchise, with the Immortal finally deciding to step down from being a superhero after getting beaten up and killed by Viltrumites and other villains one too many times. And honestly, I do feel kind of bad for the guy. He simply keeps getting put in these impossible situations against essentially the strongest race in the universe. How could he possibly expect to win? Well, what if Immortal got a little bit of help from Angstrom Levy and was able to bring in an infinite number of alternate versions of himself who were exactly the same? After a certain point, enough Immortals would be able to protect the planet from any alien invasion, right? So today, we ask the question that everyone has been asking. How many Immortals would it take to stop a Saiyan invasion from Dragon Ball Z? Would it take 5, 10, 100, 1,000? Let's find out. If you like this kind of stuff, make sure to like, subscribe, and let's jump right in. Now, to properly stop the Saiyan invasion, there are actually 4 separate fights that you need to win. Raditz, the 6 Cybermen, Nappa, and obviously Vegeta. Each of these fights is a massive jump in difficulty and strength over the one that comes before, so for each round, we'll be determining how many Immortals it would take to overcome each opponent. Now, for this video, I will be using the Immortal specifically from the Invincible show and not the comics. This is good for the Immortal, as his scaling is honestly better in the show than it is in the comic. In the comic, he literally gets off-screened by Omni-Man, while at least in the show, he can put up a bit of a fight. So, how strong is the Immortal? The Immortal's best feat in the show obviously comes from his showings against Viltrumites, in particular Omni-Man and Invincible. Now, it's particularly controversial on if the Immortal actually scales to Omni-Man or not in any capacity, as both in the first and last episode of Season 1, he's able to damage, smack around, and even temporarily match the attacks from Omni-Man, but does eventually just get overpowered and completely torn apart. So, what's going on here? Is Omni-Man, for some reason, just holding back until the end of their fights? In my opinion, no. What I think is happening here are 2 different factors mixing all at once: Viltrumite adaptation and natural human adrenaline boosts. Guidebooks for the Invincible series go in depth about the history and physiology of Viltrumites, helping explain why they can do what they do and where they come from. In particular, it's explained that Viltrumite DNA is unique and that it aggressively heals and adapts to the situation it finds itself in. In other words, Viltrumites, just like Saiyans, can get Zenkai boosts. After their bodies are damaged or are met with extreme adversity, their DNA repairs better, stronger, and more adapted to that scenario. This essentially explains why Omni-Man could barely beat the Guardians of the Globe, and yet later on in the series, without doing any training or anything, is still stronger than Mark, who was already seemingly leagues above the Immortal by himself. Furthermore, the reason he did so well in a 1v1 with Omni-Man at the end of Season 1 is because as a human, the Immortal gets a boost from rage and adrenaline, something we see Mark use in a far more successful fashion against Conquest at the end of Season 3. The Immortal being Viltrumite level, at least in a burst of rage, is consistent with databooks, who again list him as one of the 3 known entities at the time who can hang with Viltrumites in any capacity. So, at least in power and speed, when in rage, the Immortal should reasonably scale to at least the casual or semi-serious feats from Omni-Man or other weaker Viltrumites. Thankfully, one of the best feats of the show comes before even episode 1, with Omni-Man saving the Earth from a Texas-sized meteor.
You should have seen the asteroid I diverted a few years ago. The size of Texas.
Which is a moon-level feat. Now, speed is a bit more vague. Again, Invincible characters, especially Viltrumites, can cross intergalactic distances in weeks and solar systems in mere minutes, making them massively faster than light in speed. And again, the Immortal can keep up with Viltrumites, at least temporarily, even though his own travel speed is seemingly a far more pitiful Mach 3. So I'm comfortable putting his peak speed, when at full power, probably somewhere around faster than light, though impossible to exactly quantify. So with all this being said, let's get into round 1 and start counting Immortals. Raditz. Goku's brother consistently is stated to have a power level of 1,500, making him over 3 times stronger than Piccolo, who immediately after the fight with Raditz blew up the moon. Depending on the size of the explosion, this feat can range anywhere from moon to large planet level in power, and Raditz would be 3 times stronger than him pretty simply. So how many Immortals would it take to beat him? Well, at the low end, Raditz would only be about 3 times stronger than the Immortal. Immortal is moon level, and Raditz is 3 times stronger than moon level. Duh. But the thing is that 3 Immortals don't guarantee the win just because the cumulative power of theirs is the same as Raditz's. There need to be enough Immortals as to where not only do they have a cumulative power advantage, but Raditz wouldn't be able to take out enough before getting overwhelmed. But by that same token, it was essentially a 3v1 that took Raditz out in the main story of Dragon Ball. Still, as a Dragon Ball character, he has the advantage of ki attacks that would let him take out multiple opponents at once or from a range. So I would say that comfortably, it would take at least 10 Immortals to beat Raditz. They are not so much weaker that Raditz could just blast them all away with Aura, and we've seen how he could be absolutely caught off guard by characters weaker than himself. However, this was Raditz at his weakest, but we'll talk about higher ends later. For now, let's move on to the next round. Saiyaman. Now, each Saiyaman is individually weaker than Raditz with a power level of 1,200. However, cumulatively, they would have a power level of 7,200. Due to the fact that just like the Immortals, they can't all just fuse into a single fused Saiyaman or something, we can pretty easily just multiply out the strength here. So this one's easy. With 10 Immortals probably being able to take down one Raditz, it would take about 50 Immortals to defeat all of the Saiyaman, just because they aren't quite as strong as Raditz is, and any Immortal who survives their Saiyaman fight can join in and help some of the others. So let's move back to the Saiyans. Nappa. Now, here's where things start getting messy and the numbers start getting really high. This is Tien. His power level is 1,830, making him stronger than Raditz by a good margin. Here's how he did against a suppressed Nappa. Not only can Nappa's individual attacks rip apart someone stronger than Raditz, but he loves to use large area of effect attacks that take out multiple opponents at once. Again, while using the absolutely horrendous moon level lowball for Raditz, Nappa with a power level of 4,000 bare minimum would be 10 times stronger than any Immortal individually and strong enough to casually one-shot him with a punch multiple times over. The question now really becomes how many waves of Immortals need to attack Nappa before he finally gets tired enough where attacks start being strong enough to hurt him. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that it might take tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of Immortals to take down Nappa. Their absolute best bet would be their sheer numbers making Nappa stupidly like he is, spam massive ki blasts like he did on Earth, and eventually burn through his ki reserve so the last 1,000 Immortals can all bum rush him and eventually take him out, only to then face Vegeta. Things were messy before, but now they're kind of just downright stupid. Vegeta is between 4 to 5 times stronger than Nappa, meaning that now purely off of power levels, it would take a combined power of 400 to 500 Immortals to even match a single punch from Vegeta. At this point, even just Vegeta's ki aura would probably just melt thousands of Immortals at once. So how many would it take? Honestly, I don't think any number of mortals could ever beat Vegeta in a standard sense. Their attacks would literally never do damage to him and would probably break the Immortal's arms just trying to punch the Saiyan. There would need to be so many Immortals that Vegeta simply fails to kill all of them in his entire lifetime. So many Immortals that they fill an entire galaxy. And Vegeta simply can't launch enough planet-busting attacks over the next 80 years or so to wipe them all away, because unlike Vegeta, the Immortals obviously can't die of old age. So technically, after decades and decades of waves of Immortals flying at Vegeta, an old Vegeta would finally pass away, leaving the undecillionth Immortal as the last and only survivor, and that's lowballed Vegeta. Remember, this was all based off of Raditz being slightly over moon level rather than large planet level. The gap between the moon level and large planet level by itself is already 17 million times, and as we've discussed, as strength gaps grow larger, so does the effectiveness of a number advantage go down. Furthermore, Vegeta would actually be almost 2 times the power of the Dwarf Star level feat of his father, and then another 10 times stronger as an Uzaru. So, hypothetically, if every Immortal managed to fuse into one single Ultra Immortal that had all of their stats combined, it would still take more than a quadrillion That's 10 with 15 zeros, Immortals to defeat the Prince of all Saiyans and put an end to a Saiyan invasion. Not so much of a fraud anymore, am I right, guys? If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, and thank you to my members. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.